On today's episode, we're going to be having a look at something somebody sent me, which is apparently iced over canals and possibly ruins buried under the ice in Greenland. So we're going to be having a look at that as well as some old maps of Greenland. So once again, this is none of my research. This has been sent to me by somebody else. So we're just going to be having a look over it, and you can make up your own minds and tell me what you think in the comments down below. So first things first, we're going to have a look at what Greenland looks like on these different satellite images. So we've got this from Bing. This is the Bing satellite imagery. We can see Greenland here. It's pretty much just covered in ice, aside from the odd sections like down here. We can see that the whole thing is pretty much covered with ice. Over here we've got some areas where it doesn't seem to be any, but generally the whole thing is covered with ice. Now this is from Yandex, the same thing really, except we see more ice in the northern regions, so perhaps these satellite images were taken at a different time, although look at that, very strange. Not put much effort into that. And down here we can see the proper satellite imagery, but we can see that it's covered in ice. The Google Maps version, we can see the same thing. Once again up here, melted ice, but the whole thing generally covered in ice. And the final one is ArcGIS, and we can see again the same thing that we're seeing, absolutely covered in ice. A bit more detail up here. And finally on Google Earth, we can zoom in, and once again it is just completely flat, and you can't really make out anything. Look at that. So there's not much structure going. Oh, if we zoom in even further, actually, we do get a little bit of land. Not really much to work with, is it? As you can see, keep zooming out, and that is it. So it gives you an idea that you can't really get much information from using these maps, which is fair enough. They're not exactly going to have mapped out the entire snowy regions, but it does raise some curious questions about what might be lying under here. So how old is the ice over Greenland? More than 1 million years ago, frosty Greenland was ice-free. Its bare bedrock exposed for 280,000 years. The atomic isotope beryllium-10 told the scientists that the rock had at one point been ice-free. To gauge how long that period lasted, they compared the amounts of beryllium to quantities of aluminium-26. It appears at a 7:1 ratio to beryllium-10, but decays twice as fast. Quantity of aluminium atoms relative to beryllium told the scientists that once the ice cover melted away, the rock was exposed for more than 280,000 years, up until about 1.1 million years ago. So to summarize, the ice on the island of Greenland is about 1.1 million years old. The presence of ice-rafted sediments in deep-sea cores recovered from northeast Greenland in the Fram Strait and south of Greenland indicated the more or less continuous presence of either an ice sheet or ice sheets covering significant parts of Greenland for the last 18 million years. From about 11 million years ago to 10 million years ago, the Greenland ice sheet was greatly reduced in size. The Greenland ice sheet formed in the middle Miocene by coalescence of ice caps and glaciers. The western and eastern Greenland mountains constitute passive continental margins that were uplifted in two phases, 10 and 5 million years ago, in the Miocene epoch. There was an intensification of glaciation during the late Pliocene. Ice sheet formation occurred in connection to uplift of the West Greenland and East Greenland uplands. More information for the official history of Greenland can be found on the Wikipedia page or in other sources, but one of the most interesting points that it makes is this. The weight of the ice has depressed the central area of Greenland. The bedrock surface is near sea level over most of the interior of Greenland, but mountains occur around the periphery, confining the sheet along its margins. If the ice suddenly disappeared, Greenland would most probably appear as an archipelago, at least until isostasy lifted the land surface above sea level once again. So interestingly, they're claiming that we would have an archipelago, which is a series of islands, if the ice was to actually melt away from Greenland, because of the weight of the ice which has depressed the central area, causing it to sink, and if it was to suddenly melt, then supposedly we'd be left with a series of islands. Interestingly, if we turn to this book, The Anatomy of Melancholy, by Robert Burton from 1638, we can see written on page 67, this section down here, when the man is talking about different types of fowl, peacocks and pigeons, ducks and geese, swans, cranes, coots, water hens, all of these types of fowl that were coming. It says that come hither in the winter out of Scandia, Muscovy, Greenland, Friesland, which half the year are covered all over with snow and frozen up. So the point being there is that for half the year, Greenland is supposedly frozen up with snow, only for half the year, which is a bit of an odd suggestion, because as we know, Greenland is supposed to be the only permanent ice sheet outside of Antarctica. Now, if we come to this 1570 Mercator map, which shows the lands of Hyperborea in the center, you can see down here that Greenland is clearly marked and appears to be ice-free, with mountains marked and many rivers, as well as towns. According to the official narrative, 3/4 of Greenland is covered by the only permanent ice sheet outside of Antarctica. With a population of about 56,480 people in the year 2013, it is the least densely populated territory in the world. About a third of the population live in Nuuk, the capital and largest city. The Arctic Umiak Line ferry acts as a lifeline for Western Greenland, connecting the various cities and settlements. The image below should give you a general idea of how populated the place is, and where everyone is at. Greenland has been inhabited at intervals over at least the last 4,500 years by Arctic peoples whose forebears migrated there from what is now Canada. Norsemen settled the uninhabited southern parts of Greenland beginning in the 10th century, having previously settled Iceland to escape persecution from the King of Norway and his central government. These Norsemen would later set sail from Greenland and Iceland, with Leif Erikson becoming the first known European to reach North America nearly 500 years before Columbus reached the Caribbean islands. In the 13th century, Inuit peoples arrived. Though under continuous influence of Norway and Norwegians, Greenland was not formally under the Norwegian crown until 1262. The Norse colonies disappeared in the late 15th century when Norway was hit by the Black Death and entered a severe decline. Soon after their demise, beginning in 1499, the Portuguese briefly explored and claimed the island, naming it Terra de Lavrador, later applied to Labrador in Canada. In the early 18th century, Danish explorers reached Greenland once again. To strengthen trading and power, Denmark and Norway affirmed sovereignty over the island. Because of Norway's weak status, it lost sovereignty over Greenland in 1814 when the Union was dissolved. Greenland became Danish in 1814 and was fully integrated into the Danish state in 1953 under the Constitution of Denmark. If we come to this 1747 map of Old Greenland provided to us by David Rumsey, we can see clearly Greenland depicted here with some kind of strange passage through the middle, and when we zoom in on it, it is said here these straits were formerly passable, but now they are shut up with ice. So we have a strange passage going straight through the middle of Greenland which supposedly was passable. At some point in history, they were told, you used to be able to go through here, but now it's shut up with ice. We can see here comparing that map to a satellite image of Greenland gives us a general position of where this canal or passageway might have been situated. A zoomed-in image provided to us by the Stolen History Forum shows what they believe to be this passage going through the center here between these mountains. This here is a 1592 map by Vincenzo Coronelli, displaying the southern tip of Greenland with no ice. It has 2 straits, or channels. Additionally, it presents us with an ever-confusing topic of whether Friesland ever existed. It's interesting to note the many trees that seem to be growing in the southern tip. This illustration is taken from the book The Description of Natural History of Greenland by Hans Egder and published by Philibert in 1763. Once again, we can see a canal moving through the center of Greenland. Another image here shows what would have been the passage going through the center again, and 2 more down south like we saw on the other image. This map is from 1770. Now of course we do have this older 1569 map which shows no canals at all, but does seem to show the mountain ranges of Greenland even though we don't have much detail. Another map of Greenland from 1818 has had the mainstream narrative applied to it, The mainstream narrative of course calls it the incorrect assumption, as seen from this, with a map of Greenland illustrating the incorrect assumption that the Norse settlements of Greenland were located in southwest and southeast Greenland. Many of the localities named in the Icelandic sagas are placed on this map at imaginary sites on the unknown east coast of Greenland. The map is from the second English edition of Hans's Description of Greenland, a slightly modified version of the first English edition published in 1741. The map of course shows the same things as we saw before. It is said that this strait was formerly passable, but now is choked up with ice, and of course ridges of mountains covered with perpetual ice and snow. But of course it is important to note that they only call it the ridges of the mountains. In 1888, Fridtjof Nansen, a mere biology student at the University of Oslo and an avid skier, organized a daring expedition, crossing the Greenlandic ice sheet from east, a mostly uninhabited wasteland, to west, where most of the Greenlanders lived, as opposed to the previous Greenlandic expeditions, which had all started from west to east. Nansen was not alone on this journey. He assembled a crew that included some highly competent and hardy men. From left to right in this image, we see Olli Ravner, Christian Dietrichson, Fridtjof Nansen, Otto Sverdrup, Christian Christiansen Trana, and Samuel Johansson Balto. It is rather remarkable that Nansen's initial proposed route was exactly where the above-mentioned canal would be. Mr. Nansen and co. were unable to execute the planned route, shown here in red, and had to settle for one that they actually took, in green. Is it possible that Nansen was working off information passed down to him from others, which told him of a strait which could be passable? Nowadays, scientists are highly concerned with how fast Greenland is losing its million-year-old ice sheet. As a matter of fact, it was recorded that in one single day, 12.5 billion tons of ice melted. It's possible our scientists will have some interesting things to talk about in the near future as the ice melts, and historians too. As shown from the section of this book published by the alumni of Marshall College in 1849, which says, "The researches in Greenland too have been greatly extended by the labours of Reverend George T. Joe Jennison, where important ruins are situated. In Volume 3 of the Royal Society of Northern Antiquaries may be found a vast deal pertaining to this subject, from which it appears that Greenland too abounds in ancient ruins of much interest." So we can see in Volume 3 of the Royal Society of Northern Antiquaries, there are vast ruins. Apparently Greenland too is covered in ancient ruins of much interest, and we've never heard about this as far as I'm aware, ancient ruins in Greenland, which will be something important to look over. We do notice on the United States Naval Special Warfare Command, the anchor is actually placed just off the coast of Greenland, which some people have suggested is symbolizing something. So is that a message there, or is that just reaching? You tell me in the comments down below. And going back to the point earlier about Greenland's ice melting, so the suggestions from the authors of this information, what they tell us is going on is apparently something happened to Greenland maybe 500, 600, 700 years ago at some point in the past, but in recorded history, something happened to Greenland to actually make it colder. And they're suggesting that before that, people were living there, and yes, it was cold, but it wasn't permanently frozen over as they're suggesting now. And as a result, this melting ice is just reverting to the way that Greenland was before this event changed it, before this event made it so cold, that now all that ice is melting, returning to the ocean, and that it's all part of a natural cycle, which I think we could all debate about, but that isn't why we're here today. But that's what the authors of the article say. And what do you think to that? So once again, this was none of my information. This was coming from the Stolen History forums. So you can take it with as much salt as you want. I'd like to hear your opinions down in the comments below, particularly about the canals. Is it possible that there are ancient ruins? Maybe Greenland really was passable with a passage through almost the middle of it only a few hundred years ago. I mean, those stories have got to have come from somewhere, surely, or maybe it's all just made up. So you let me know in the comments down below what you think about that. If you'd like to support the channel, there are a few ways you can do. The best way, the way that I prefer, is if you join Patreon, because then you can come and talk to us in the Discord channel. But that's completely up to you if that's something you want to do. If not, then just like and subscribe, and that'll keep me very, very happy. So thank you very much, guys. I'll catch you on the next episode of Ancient Historia.